Well, you were the president of the United States, the most powerful guy in the world. And there must have been some moments of conflict between your conscience and the national interest of the U.S. So I wonder how you felt at that moment. Like, you have to put your national interest before your moral standard.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. I am very proud of the fact that I was able to serve for 8 years as President of the United States, and always felt as if I was able to maintain my own personal integrity and moral standards, and the people I was surrounded by in the White House also operated with great integrity. One of the things I'm most proud of is that we never had a scandal during my 8 years in office, which is unusual, not just in the United States, but I think everywhere. Yeah. But you're absolutely right that there are times where, when you're operating at the highest levels, particularly internationally, you are constantly weighing competing equities. So let's say that I'm working with a Middle Eastern country that has a bad human rights record but is an ally when it comes to defeating Al-Qaeda. And they are providing us intelligence that is preventing a terrorist attack. You do have to then make a determination in that particular instance, how much priority do I give to that assistance versus me putting pressure on them in terms of how they are dealing with, let's say, journalists in their own country or political dissidents. The way I resolve this is to think both in terms of short-term and long-term. If I'm dealing with a country like China, then obviously U.S.-Chinese relations encompasses a lot of different issues. And for us to get the Paris Agreement done, for example, and deal with climate change, we're the two largest carbon emitters, and we had to have a partnership. And I have to have a good working relationship with President Xi. That's the immediate interest that I have to work on. But I also have to recognize that we have competing values in some cases, and that it was important for me to continue to raise those issues whenever I met with a President Xi. And one thing that I did learn is that even if you can't always completely change what is happening in another country, what you can do is, by just raising the issue and shining a spotlight on it, if I'm in a meeting with a foreign leader and I say at the end of the meeting, you have 5 journalists who are imprisoned, and it's important for the United States that you treat them fairly and release them, that just by bringing that issue up, it could, at the margins, create an opening for better treatment of those journalists. So you get these small successes, and you hope that over time you're creating a new pattern on the international stage. And I think when the United States is silent completely on these issues, then I think that's bad for the international community generally.
So it's like we can never be perfect, but we can meet somewhere in the middle.
Well, we can be better, right? And I think that particularly when it comes to the international stage, one of the things that I try to emphasize is that even if we can't completely eliminate war or poverty or hunger or discrimination or the abuse of women, we can make it better. Mm-hmm. And over time, those small steps become real progress. I think we can't do that alone, and the United States has to act with some humility, recognizing that we have our own problems at home and that we are imperfect. There were times where I would acknowledge America's imperfections on the world stage, and I would be criticized sometimes by conservatives, Republican leaders for apologizing for the United States. And in fact, I would explain, no, I'm not apologizing, I'm simply stating a reality, because if I can show that the United States has its own problems, but we are trying to improve, that, I think, gives me more credibility when I say to another country, you also have problems, but you also can improve.
Well, you entered the White House in one of the worst times of the U.S. history, the financial crisis, and 2 ongoing wars, and also the polarization. I can say that President Biden, your vice president and longtime friend, has taken over office in a very similarly difficult time. Like COVID-19, possible economic crisis, and even more polarized Capitol Hill. So is there any advice that you can give to him?
Well, I think...
Well, you entered the White House in one of the worst times of the U.S. history, the financial crisis, and 2 ongoing wars, and also the polarization. I can say that President Biden, your vice president and longtime friend, has taken over office in a very similarly difficult time. Like COVID-19, possible economic crisis, and even more polarized Capitol Hill. So is there any advice that you can give to him?
Well, I think he's doing a wonderful job. He has brought into his White House, his administration, many of the same senior aides and staff that worked with the 2 of us during my presidency. So they have experience and have learned from both our successes and our mistakes during my presidency. And so I think he's doing an excellent job. I agree with you that in both cases we were coming into difficult challenges. The economic challenges are slightly different. The drop in economic activity wasn't quite as severe as it has been because of COVID, but it was actually in some ways more dangerous because the financial system was on the verge of meltdown that could have triggered a Great Depression. Here, what I think we have is a situation where, and the Biden administration is doing the exact right thing, you had essentially the economy have to shut down for a while, but as soon as the public health situation improved, consumers had a lot of money, they didn't have a lot of debt as they did back in 2008, you didn't have a housing bubble like 2008, you didn't have companies and banks that were over leveraged like you did in 2008. So I think the possibility of bouncing back more quickly rather than a long path towards economic recovery, I think is more promising. I think the challenge that he faces politically is similar to what we saw during my administration, and that was the increased unwillingness to see any cooperation between the political parties. And I know that President Biden wants cooperation and to find common ground with the Republicans. But as was true when I was president, they have found it convenient to not cooperate because they think that's the best path for them to return to power. I also think what's changed is the media landscape has gotten even worse than it was. I don't know whether this has happened in Korea, but certainly here in the United States, and also you're seeing this in much of Europe, the growth of right-wing media outlets in the United States like Fox News or talk radio like Rush Limbaugh, and now social media on platforms like Facebook, have created a situation in which a large portion of the country gets its information from a completely different source than traditional news sources. And this is how falsehood that there was something wrong with the election, that Joe Biden somehow had cheated in the election. A significant number of people in America believe that because that's what they're getting from their news sources.
Well, it's really interesting because when the SNS and social media and internet was introduced, everybody believed that it's going to be like a big motivation to improve the grassroots democracy.
Yes.
Because it opens the door to everybody. But it seems
Yes.
like now it's becoming more of an epicenter of fake news and the mistrust.
I think you're exactly right. Look, I write about this in the book.
Right.
You know, early social media was a very significant tool in helping me get elected because I could communicate with young people all across the country and empower them. I could give them information. They could go out and
Exactly.
organize. We saw in the early days of the Arab Spring, as I write about.
Right.
You know, I think a lot of young activists in places like Tahrir Square were using social media as a way of bypassing authoritarian, control of the media. But what we have learned is that although it can empower, it can also provide a tool for everything from neo-Nazis to ISIS, anti-Semitic organizations to racist organizations, build their power in ways that are very dangerous. And it can increase polarization within democracies in ways that are also dangerous. So it's something that I think we're going to have to grapple with in every country for some time to come. I think is an ongoing challenge for all democracies. It's possible for us to have strong disagreements on various issues, whether it's taxes or environmental policy or social policy, but so long as we have the same facts, then we can have a useful debate. But when we get into a situation in which one group of voters or elected officials believe something completely different in terms of facts from another, then you start getting significant, difficult conflicts, and it's hard for democracies to resolve those because you start getting enormous mistrust and an inability to communicate effectively across party lines. And that's something that I'm consistently worried about, and that I don't think there's a simple answer to, but we're going to have to find ways in which we can return to a situation in which everyone is operating on one set of facts and there are trusted news outlets that everybody is listening to. Because democracy only works not if everybody agrees with each other, but if at least we have some social trust between each other. Some of what we're seeing on the internet is designed to break down trust rather than to build up trust.